Without any further ado, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this evening, Ray Brown, the Managing Director of Architectus. Ray is a studio leader at the UNSW Master of Architecture program and design leader for 1 Bligh Street in Sydney, another one of our exemplary tall buildings. So Ray, you might need this to switch slides, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Okay, thanks for that. It's interesting talking up here without a left hand. It's a bit like, I feel like I'm going to launch the iPhone or something at the moment. Competition's very interesting. When you lose a competition, I'm sure many of you have had that feeling. It really feels, you really feel very alone at that point when you find out. But I'm actually in quite good company tonight. There are 5 others, 4 others. And of course Philip, who has the biggest smile and can be the most motivated. So yeah, it's an interesting process, competitions. You really, you get a shot at it. You throw your ideas out there. You have a go. Sometimes you feel like you might have more of a running than others, and other times you think, well, we'll just have a shot at this, and we're not quite sure what the client might be looking for. And that was probably more the case in this instance for us. Of course, we're very grateful to be invited to participate. We found it fascinating for a lot of reasons. I mean, a very interesting old building, 1965, it was finished, and a lot of things sort of took our interest on this project. I mean, when this building was built in 1965, it was actually planning started about 1960. It took so long to get through planning. It was the first project to go to court to get some extra height and increase the size of the floor space. That they ended up wanting to build it in steel just to make up some of the lost time. Quite an interesting fact, and also part of the reason that the building could be reused was that it was built in steel. And again, I think speed was the imperative this time around. Some well-known names from Sydney architecture worked on the project. Peter Johnson, Lawrence Neal worked on the project. Angus Teese. So, big names from Sydney architecture over the years. It was very much a technological breakthrough from the time, very big spans, 22-metre span, steel frame, fully designed, integrated induction units on the perimeter, beautiful window system, etc. So we sort of liked it just looking at it. It was very interesting. It's a good book by Jennifer Taylor that gives quite a detailed description of it. Other things, Greenland, first project in Sydney. There's a real move on at the moment in Sydney, change to high-rise living, and I don't know if you feel the same, but it feels like there's been a much more acceptance in the last couple of years about what is happening in Sydney, and clearly high-density living is on the agenda. And the other one is a step change in development. There's pressure on for height limits and all that sort of thing. Interestingly, when this building was built, first one to go to court, it was one of the first raft of buildings that came through after the removal of the Heights of Buildings Act, which had basically governed heights of building for 50 years in Sydney since about 1913. They took that off, and there was AMP down at the quay in this building. And then the City Council went, actually, we need to control this, and it was the first introduction of some planning controls around heights of buildings relative to widths of streets and bonuses, and pretty much the genesis of the system we're dealing with now. So interestingly, I think we're at a step change in terms of Sydney again. What are we going to do with heights of buildings at this point in time? And I think this project is interesting that's just occurring now, 50 years later. So interesting, I took this from the Urban Task Force, thank you very much for that, showing the height of this building. Quite interesting, quite tall for Sydney, but then you put it in the world context, and it really is maybe not so tall. So, if you want to be that international city, is height about that? Clearly, getting a couple of these things for clocks would be maybe not so good. But anyway, it's quite interesting to see that comparison. So over to our project, I mean, we looked at the typology of residential buildings and what they might be like, tall buildings. I mean, Lumiere is a good example of the skin building where the balconies are hidden and so on. It could be a commercial building almost, and we took another approach, which was really more about expressing the individual habitation of the project. And this is one of my favourite projects from Singapore, which I think is really quite beautiful. So our project, was based around that idea of habitation. It was based around the idea of scale and how do we scale a building within the city, from the city scale to the neighbourhood, and then to the scale of habitation of the unit itself. Next slide. So to the site, I think everyone knows where it is, right in here. Geographically, the site we thought was quite interesting too, in terms of where it sits at Macquarie Street Ridge, pretty much running through here, and then Clarence Street out this way. And we sort of almost get this tightening of the waist at the point of this site, and with these wonderful views out to the east, over Hyde Park, and then similar views as the topography drops away, and views down the Darling Harbour on the west. So we thought the east-west was actually much more important than the north view or the southern view. So they're the views, and if you and obviously a view at the high level to the CBD, but importantly from the east over Hyde Park, we think it's just a beautiful outlook and really quite alone in a way in the city from this view. And equally from Darling Harbour, again a fantastic vista. So for us, east and west was probably more important than the north view. To achieve that, we looked at the approved envelope, which is shown there in the elevation. This is the existing building, this is where you could build to. There it is in plan above. But what we said was, what we wanted to do was reduce that envelope, pull the building in on the east and west, and actually expand it a little bit on the north and south. And in plan, you can see Bathurst Street there to the north. That's the envelope. I should just go and talk about that for a moment. There's two envelopes there, the existing building in the red, then the approved envelope, which was for a structure which went around at some sort of diagram in the stage one, and it's right on the boundary. You just make it out, but the boundary, it touches the boundary, so it's really very difficult condition. And also to this building here, whatever it's called, that pink and blue thing. So we felt by cutting the building back in that direction, we could improve some of those relationships, particularly here, give ourselves a bit more east and west, and but certainly compromise the planning envelope, which might have been critical in our assessment of our scheme. So that's how it looks in plan. So to cut the building back from the red line, which is approved, and then we felt that would open up views a little bit more to buildings behind us and around us, so they could see through more, particularly this residential building to the south. And then solar access, so we'd improve solar access through the streets, obviously through the north and south, particularly Pitt Street, which is quite narrow, and then obviously exploit the views a little bit more to the east and the west. So that was how it looked. So looking from Bathurst Street, you can obviously clearly see the units there, and the idea of balconies nestled in spaces between projecting elements, which would give them some wind protection, and then on the high levels, winter gardens. I'll run through this very quickly. Where's the timer? 2 minutes to go. Better hurry up. So that's our ground floor plan. This network, I think everybody would have something like this with some connections and laneways and so on. The hotel, the apartment, creative hub, which was an interesting overlay. A bit about circulation, and hotel drop-off, and then some servicing, and car park lifts, which we thought might be quite fun, having glass and help to activate that, and they're coming up from the basement below, they're accessed from below. And that's how it looked on the corner for retail, and then looking into the one of its main access ways to the hotel. Sort of a laneway style. Some opportunities for artwork in this interstitial tight space between the hotel and the new building in the laneway. The creative hub, which masked a multitude of issues, and then our structure coming to the ground there, and then that's just what you'd expect, I suppose. So just how it breaks down into the low, mid and high. There's 500 apartments in the scheme. And just moving to that. Structure was very important to us. We worked very closely with Enstruct, John Hewitt, who's here tonight, and Ross Clark. The idea was to do a lightweight core and to build mega columns on the outside of the structure, get to this level, transfer it up, and then do a transfer and load all of this onto these 4 columns, which made them very structurally efficient. It's also very fast in terms of putting that together. The negative was that we needed this brace, which we put internally, so it meant we had changing room plans just to deal with where that brace might actually occur. But the strategy was to have a room dimension on the outside of that brace, so we would always have a 4 metre space beyond that, and maintain those corner views out, so we get very open glass corners to the building. And then just in terms of how that worked out, we worked with Hutchinson Builders in terms of methodology and program on that, how that would actually happen. A little bit about lifts, which nobody really cares about. Strategies, things we did differently from the reference. We put all the air conditioning on a floor by floor, every 4 floors. On the south, we put some small condenser units and so on, which is more of a sort of Singapore solution, I would say. But the thing it did allow us to do was not have any plant on the roof. So we got these four quite beautiful sky homes on the top with support courtyards on the corners and double-storey spaces, and really nothing up there other than the lift motor room. So quite an opportunity, we thought. Open, natural ventilation and all the things in the corridors. Bit of work on facade. We thought it could have quite an interesting modular solution in terms of clipping these elements on, and did a bit of work down that path, but also looked at it in terms of a straight sort of curtain wall up front. And then lots of apartments, which I'll flip through very quickly, and there are different options for different styles. And then I just threw this in because I kind of like these Space Invader graphics down the bottom there, there's no change. But for no other reason, you can see tonight. So I think is
6 seconds, right?
and then we didn't feel like we'd quite done enough work, so we made a movie, which I must admit is a little bit over the top. And we'll play that. You're lucky though; you don't get the soundtrack. So thank you. I'll leave you with that.